All right, good morning. Thank you for making it out here. I'm Jordan.
And I'm Rusty.
Click. Yes, all right, Bioslide. We play CTFs. We used to work for Raytheon for many years, then we quit and we founded a company because we wanted to make CTF stuffs a business. We'll see how that works out. This just happened. If any of this is relevant to you, then this talk may be for you. The last one being, of course, to catch all, to catch as much as possible. Questions asked during the talk. If you want to wait to the end, you can, but yell it out. We'll make Dave run. This will be fun. Yell it out, raise your hands. We'll repeat the question. But I like questions. I'm a little bit ADD, so I like it coming throughout it in the middle of it. And show if they can't see my slide now, so that'll be fine. The first 15 people that can actually read that font and type in that code on that SSID can get on the internet if you want to. I would actually like, if some people would, that would be nice. We have a demo. We're going to run a real online live demo with our actual game server and a real MMO. This is part of the talk. So I don't see anyone pulling out a laptop. We may be alone on the server. But anyways, if you would like to join, I'm going to leave the slide up here for just a second longer. Write down that SSID, write down that code, and then write down the URL, and you can hop on. It does help if you have a GPU. Not integrated on your laptop, but you can maybe get away with it depending on the provision of the integrated. So, you can hop on and troll us. That's the real selling point, right, if you want to. Okay, motivation. Yeah, we're gonna skip that. There's money and time and game industry hacking and a bunch of other stuff that's happened. Oh yeah, you know what already. I should have used this thing, should I? All right, you're gonna have to hit X for me because I think I'm doing the wrong way. Is this the right one? It's working. I just didn't know it was. Okay, so yeah, game industry hacking. One that I think is slightly interesting is that some of the hacks that happen in the game industry, I think, act as a little bit of a bellwether for what we see in the commodity security market. One of the interesting ones is, of course, code signing became ubiquitous on console platforms far earlier than it did on most other consumer electronics. And so the same hacks that you would see there was actually the repurposing that was talked about in the malware talk yesterday, talked about taking something that's already code signed and then just embedding in your separate library with it to get past code signing. Well, the same thing happened in early video games. You just take anything that's code signed and had an exploit in it, and then bundle that for your piracy or for your jailbreak for the console platform or whatever it was. So this is a relatively early technique in the console world that I think we sort of see similarly today in modern platforms as they deploy these offenses. The other thing that's super interesting to me is what's this sort of speedrun kind of culture in video games. Who here has seen a speedrun? Excellent. If you haven't, you need to go watch the speedrun. These are guys that just play games really quickly. And then they got like obsessed, and I mean really obsessed. They started glitching games. It started with, well, if I do this weird thing, then if I walk off the edge of the screen here in Pokemon, then I can warp to the end thing very quickly. And they were actually memory corruption bugs that they didn't even know were memory corruption bugs at the time. Now they know, because they really, really know this stuff. The most recent one is using a thing called TazBot, which actually they're actually using an old Rob, the little NES controller from the 80s, to hardware interface to the input ports on a Super Nintendo. And then they have a Super Game Boy cartridge that has a Game Boy game inside of it, emulating, so it's an emulator playing Game Boy Yellow, or Pokemon Yellow or Pokemon Red. And they'll play it with pure inputs, right? So the only inputs into the system, they're not doing this in an emulator, they're doing it in the real hardware. They'll play the game from the bot, and they'll strip it up, and they'll actually exploit the emulated game. They'll overwrite the memory of the emulator itself. They'll start writing native code in the hardware, all like using loaders at each stage to actually increase the attack surface or increase the bandwidth of their channel. And so they'll start with just the Game Boy input, like up, down, left, right, ABs, and they'll input another payload, it's just a separate stager. It's ludicrous. There's notes in the slides. Go check those out later because it's fascinating what they're doing. Exploiting this stuff, and they're not security people per se. They're just guys screwing with video games, doing really, really interesting work. There's the video where they actually implemented this. They were streaming Twitch chat into a Super Nintendo out of TV via the wired interface. It was just nuts, absolutely crazy. The other thing that's interesting is the capture the flags in general have really taken off. There's a ton of them. There's actually more than there are weekends in the year these days. So if you go to CTF Time, you can pull up the number of CTFs. It's a little ludicrous. Another quick audience survey, because it's early on to make sure everyone's awake. who has played on a CTF team that is on CTF time? That is a massive number of people compared to if I would have asked like 3 years ago, right? Like this is pretty interesting to me how this is no longer like as much of a niche community as it used to be, at least to some degree. I'm going to skip all this. Everybody knows what CTFs are. If you don't, ask me now or ask me later. Capture the flag stuff. What's interesting too is that there's a lot of overlap now between bugs in capture the flag events and bugs in the real world. And so we pulled out a selection of these. This is by no means exhaustive, but some of the ones that we felt were most interesting, we looked at. So PHP is a bug that is exploited in CTFs quite frequently. I include the language as a class of bug, just about. They're pretty bad. If you've never seen this truth table, this is comparison in PHP with double equals. And it's very different than triple equals, and it's very nuanced. I mean, this is like super obnoxious. And there have been so many challenges based on this. One of my favorite ones is a little bit hard to read. The simplest case here was there is a key, there's a password, and if the password that you give it in an argument was stir case comp, which again is not even using the double equal, so it's a little bit subtle to realize that it's still essentially using the same buggy methodology. If it passed the stir case compare, it would be like, yes, then you get the key. You really should only ever pass this check if you knew the password, right? Like this is about as simple and straightforward as it gets. Who knows what the flaw here is? I know plenty of people do. Yes?
Compared to an array.
Compared to an array. It turns out if you just pass an array, and you can pass an array as an argument in a URL, you just add some braces. It's like, oh, no problem. You're now an array, and it's like, sure, you pass. Anything will work. You have no actual string. This should not be. It's ridiculous. Einbazen is one of the more famous CTF teams. Had another nice PHP bug where they accidentally a server because they didn't realize the challenge wasn't to find the ODay in PHP CGI for that challenge, and so they did. And then afterwards they're like, oh, that wasn't, you didn't, oh, oops, there's a CD on that one. And a nice little write-up. Plaid CTF, which is actually starting later today. PPP is Carnegie Mellon, former Carnegie Mellon students and some current ones. They do a phenomenal job of making and playing CTFs. And a couple years ago, in 2013, they had a challenge called Bunyan's Revenge, where, and this all started because they tried to submit a bug to a Go, this is apocryphal at this point, so I take it with a grain of salt, but that, from what I understand, they tried to submit a bug to the Go developers who were told, oh, we don't really have bugs in Go, it's fine, we don't need to worry about security, don't worry about that, which of course meant that they had to immediately make a challenge that exploited a zero-day in Go as the actual challenge. And so they released their patch, like their diff that they give the Go developers was literally what they released. So they actually show you where the bug was, and you just had to kind of build a payload. Then they forgot to turn off NX, which was fine because Rusty was like, I'll just build a JIT spray in Go. Somebody else who actually built this exploit during the CTF was like, oh, by the way, it works in Google's App Engine. I just accidentally Googled too. So usually CTF people do. What was it? Responsibly fund, or no, reasonably fund disclosure. That was the new disclosure policy on it.
The good news was that Google actually did have a bunch of sandboxing, so it didn't actually own anything.
This is true. Yeah. No, their overall infrastructure was good. We'd hear if you were to hypothetically try that. Not that we did. Pirate Donby was a fun challenge just a month or two ago in CodeGate CTF, where it was a relatively simple type length value network protocol, and you could trigger a bzip decompression. It did some comparison between your bzip payload and a password. If you got the password right, then you would get a shell on the box. Almost actually everyone that I know that solved it did it with a timing attack. They kind of looked at it and went, oh, well, clearly they're doing like the comparison here. We could do a timing attack. It was kind of annoying. It was a little noisy in the network and not super reliable, but you could make it work. The intended solution, however, that Beist tweeted about later was to just find the bzip 2 ODay. So nobody did that, but it was apparently there. And so this actually brings up an interesting point, though, which is that there is a lot of this overlap. The people playing these CTFs are more than capable of finding real 0 days. They're just doing this other toy things for fun in a weekend because it's less annoying than some of the big stuff you would be normally working on. But you don't really know when you should actually be looking for the ODay versus when you should be just playing the challenge you think it's there. So it's sort of a fun kind of game as like when you're making a challenge, like do you hint to them that it's actually in like a library? Because normally people just overlook all the standard libraries. They assume it was built for the game. Clearly it was a challenge that was built for the game. But you can actually get a lot of interesting results if you make it hard enough that people go looking in other places, and then that's where they find the unintended ones. You have to touch on the roller skater Privesk if you're going to talk about the history of like actual 0 days used in CTF. DEF CON CTF, which everybody knows about, I assume, is one of the bigger CTFs. It's an attack defense CTF, and so you show up, everyone has the same image, and you've got a bunch of custom services written on it. You've got to exploit it, you've got to patch it, you've got to monitor your network. The specifics can change depending on the years. For a couple years, it was for many years actually, it was FreeBSD or OpenBSD based, and the one team showed up because they thought it would be more fun just to get root on everyone's boxes and then get all the services by getting one remote service, and that was a pretty good trick. They still will not confirm for sure if this was the exact CVE that they did, but it was patched shortly after. We think this is the one that they used. The organizers were super pissed that they kept rooting everybody else's VMs. They caused much, like true to their name, like roller skaters. They were all about the lulls, and they were like arming our boxes and shutting them down and just like having great fun. It was highly entertaining. Speaking of DEF CON, every year at DEF CON there is a lot of Wireshark O-Day. Most of them tend to be end days. People will just go pull some crashes out of the bug repository just to screw with people and make analysis more annoying. But there's legitimate like code execution O-Days floating around in those PCAPs. So they've started to publish the PCAPs lately, the last couple of years, more regularly. And interestingly enough, the number of actual O-Days being thrown has gone down as the publication of PCAPs has become more prevalent. So it's strange. It's almost like people don't want to burn their Wireshark bugs, but some do. It's entertaining. Guess PW was a fun challenge. This was code. Actually, it was Power was also code date. I don't know if this is going to be readable on all the slides. The short summary here is that this challenge would do real path. You gave it an argument, and it had a password file and it had a key file. And if the file you gave it, when it read the contents, matched the contents of the password file, then it would give you the key in the key file. But it would first call real path in the file you gave it to resolve symlinks and to actually get to the real file name. And then it would compare that to the password file by opening them both. The intended solution, actually, we want to take any guesses of what the intended solution was? Who didn't already solve it? Let's listen. All right, anybody who did solve it, who knows what this challenge was? Any ideas?
Didn't it resolve like only a certain number of symlinks?
Shh, that's ours. But yes, that was the other. That was not the intended solution. The intended solution was to give it a file descriptor, right? Because they had already opened the correct password file. They compared the names to make sure it wasn't the exact file name, but the socket descriptor itself, or the file descriptor, is available via the devfs, so you can just open it from there. And this is the way they called it in the trick category. It wasn't like a super complicated exploit. You literally just gave it an argument of dev fd3, and ta-da! The password fd3 matches this other file that I've already got open, and the contents are the same. There was also a race condition, potentially, because you could swap out time to check and time to use bug. I don't know that anybody actually got that working on the real box because load it was a little noisy. It was all on a shared host. This was via a SUID binary. Our solution was max symlinks, or symloop max. I don't know why there's P's there. I think that's a typo on the second side. Anybody know max symlinks offhand? What the actual value is? Or anybody know what it is, what it does? It kind of makes sense based on the name. Any guesses?
The max symlinks that OS will pull.
It's the max number of symlinks that the OS will force. Yeah, mostly. It gets defined slightly differently, and it depends on. There's actually a couple different implementations, which is why symloop max and max symlinks are used the same way. Although if you actually read the definitions are slightly different. Symloop max is the POSIX one. The short summary is, if you have a bunch of symlinks, like how far does it go? There's not actual loop detection either, by the way. They say that there's loop detection. There's really not. They just have this hard-coded limit. Like if we go over 40, it turns out is what the Unix, the Ubuntu kernel does offhand, and I assume many of the Linux kernels are using right now. In some instances in the kernel, like it's used kind of a bunch of different places and different values. It's either 80 or 40. The point is though, when it fails, like if you actually exceed this, it just stops and returns to you whatever your current value is. And now it as the second argument, if you actually give it the two arguments, the second one being a pointer to put the string of the result. But if you don't check the return value, and then you just assume that the second resolve is now going to contain a proper one, and then you call open later. Open will gladly follow the same rule. It will go up to 40 more symlinks it'll resolve, and then it will open up that file. So if you make anywhere between 40 and 80 symlinks to the proper file, then it will actually go through it. The fun one about this is I'm certain that there's going to be real bugs that do that. Like I found a couple on just Googling GitHub and or searching GitHub for RealPath and StirComp or other security checks. There's a couple of them. None of them are particularly interesting. You can just you can crash it or assert it or but that was with 5 minutes of searching and I'm lazy. Another interesting one that is happened in CTFs, it's also in the real world, was actually mentioned yesterday. There was the sort of the payload binding that was mentioned in the malware talk about using environment variables to key in your payload. We actually built a CTF payload that used CPU ID to uniquely fingerprint a destination, and so that the attack would only ever decrypt itself on a particular piece of hardware. The idea being that if you're playing DEF CON CTF and then overnight you go to your hotel room to analyze your PCAPs, you look at it, you're like, well, I don't know what that payload does, but I know they exploited my box because I'm not on that hardware anymore. It's back in the CTF room. You gotta wait till the next day. And I also learned about CH flags and the fun you can have with that during CTF, and somebody did it to us as well. All right. If you ever want to have a free tool made for you, you should make a CTF challenge that requires that itch to be scratched. So I know a number of people who've made CTF challenges with the sole purpose of the tool that would solve this the right way will help me in this other problem that I've got. And so we'll make the challenge, wait for somebody to open source a solution, and then sweet, now I've got this, whatever the tool was. For example, there is now a 3DSX file format loader for IDA because somebody released a challenge for that file format recently. So this is also a fun way to abuse CTFs.
Now there's been a trend lately of actually having games inside of the games. So capture the flag is, if any of you have been playing video games, know that capture the flag is a common game type in a video game, and that's kind of where it comes from, is the whole idea of capturing flags. So there initially was a trend of doing these text-based adventures. They're very common. You'll see them all the time in CTFs. So there's been several of them over the years. This one here is Choose Your Own Adventure, which is just a text-based adventure. You go through a world, you have to find the right path. There's a bunch of NPC characters that you can end up talking to, and basically what path you choose determines the difficulty of the exploit. There's little programming challenges. If you solve some of the programming challenges, you get an easier exploit. So it was a fun little challenge. There's been several others like Zork clones and things like that. So, but it's gotten a little more complicated lately. This is called Blocky, which was released at Ghost in the Shell code. We help run Ghost in the Shell code. There's also some other members in the audience here. And this was released several years ago in 2012. And this is a Minecraft circuit. Yeah, a redstone circuit implementing Minecraft.
Play Minecraft or have small children in your lives that play Minecraft probably, that's kind of a thing.
So the goal of this challenge was to figure out what that circuit does, and then put the inputs on the little switches inside of there was a house and there was a bunch of switches. If you get it right, it will trigger a TNT blast and you know you have the key. Otherwise, it drops creepers on your head and deletes your world.
The delete the world was my favorite part. If we could have made them download, only let you download the file once just to troll people and make them register a new account, I might have done it. Because if you didn't know that you could have permadeath as a flag on a Minecraft file, and you played it, just messed around and tested it, and then blew up, and you're like, oh wait, the file's gone. That would have been awesome. But oh well.
So here's a closer look at what Minecraft gates look like. I'm sure some people who have played with Redstone have seen this before. So,
and this is all taken from a write-up of a friend of ours, and so he's helpfully annotated it and got a lot of nice descriptions, and the slide notes have the link to his.
So just recently, this past year at PH Days, someone made, it actually looks smaller, but it's actually far more complex. It's actually got registers and flip-flops and all kinds of things. It's actually a little CPU architecture implemented inside of Minecraft. You had to reverse that. It was like a keypad code. You had to hit in your PIN code, and you had to go reverse that circuit. So it actually it stored it as a register in the register, and you had to figure out how that works, and then hit the code on the PIN pad, and then you know you got it when it actually works. So that was a pretty clever challenge. And there's a completely different style of challenge. This wasn't actually a challenge, but this was a very innovative thing that Plaid did. This was in 2012. So this was it was a 2D browser-based MMO done basically as a scoreboard. So
This is your interface to the game.
The
You walk
interface
around
to
and
the
talk to
game,
NPCs and get challenges.
so you could just walk around the world. You could get all the NPCs had like a bunch of text. Most people ended up just going and they found the text interface that was.
And we did it until like way too late in the game, and they're like, "Why are you using the text interface?" We're like, "There's a what?" Like, oh, that would have made life easier. But
Although the next year they kind of went up themselves and actually released a proper 2D MMO with actual battles that had enemies in it. You could see all the other players walking around. It was pretty fun. They had a bunch of funny names on the items. I think there was there was actually special items. You could go on a little Easter egg hunt and try to find a cool little.
it was a weapon. Yeah, a weapon you could only get by
special
solving
weapon.
other ones and using like a Shamir's secret sharing to assemble a key, and then you got that. Some sword that you could fight monsters with, but it wasn't actually worth points in the CTF proper. It was just more for kind of fun in the game.
So when we were going to run Ghost in the Shell Code the next year, we were like, let's actually make this worth some points. So we actually made Phone Adventure 2, it's actually a 3D MMO. It had challenges embedded in it. There was a bunch of quests in the game. You could only complete them by hacking the game itself. So you had to go reverse engineer the game, either figure out the network protocol or figure out what the game logic was doing, patch that or in some way modify it, and cause fly hacks, jump hacks, all kinds of weird hacks. There was several bugs in the game, and people had quite a bit of fun with that. But this year we actually did a new version that we're going to actually demo today.
The old version, the Point Adventure 2 that we did last year was in Unity, and so it was .NET reverse engineering, which made things a lot simpler. It was intentionally meant to be some of the sort of like easier level challenges because we thought that it was a great gateway drug to get people into reverse engineering and vulnerability research. Like a lot of people got their start in security hacking games or cracking software, and we thought it would be really nice to have just some really beginning challenges. We had like a teenage girl like walk in, or I don't know if she was teenage, maybe like 12. She was really, really young, who walked into ShmooCon, which is where we run Ghost in the Shell Code CTF. It's online, anybody can play anywhere, but we all sit like in a room at Ghost in the Shell Code. So some people show up and play there in person. It's fun. And she had never done like anything before. It was like, I heard this video game hacking. Like, how do I do this? We're like, awesome, sit down. And we pulled out like .NET Reflector. And just started like and all the symbols were there. It was meant to be like kind of easy mode sort of hacking. And Pony Island, Pony Adventure 3. We got a thank you from somebody who did like a video where they were like, I'm really glad that theme did not permeate the rest of the game. It wasn't entirely My Little Pony theme.
So this is actually the game world here. It's actually, during the event, there was a lot more players around. There was actually 1,200 players.
Is anybody, raise your hand if you're actually getting on right now, like if you've got a laptop and you guys are that afraid of the wireless, come on. I'm not the one you gotta worry about, Dave's got the...
So there's of course NPCs in here. You can talk to them, you can get weapons. I can buy weapons. Now I have a gun. So this is running on basically Amazon Cloud. So it's an actual MMO hosted on Amazon Cloud. And we allowed you to do anything you wanted to that client. You could reverse it, modify it, anything you wanted. So we saw all kinds of crazy hacks, but we're actually going to demonstrate some today. So normally, like, this run speed's a little slow.
That was my first complaint. I'm like,
Yeah.
why did you crank up the run
We
speed? It's
actually
like,
had-
you fixed it. It's a hacking challenge.
Yeah, we had a lot of complaints about the run speed, like, well, it'll encourage them to go hack the game. So I'm gonna actually open up this. So this is another tool that we've actually mostly made during DEF CON CTF. It's called Binary Ninja. It's actually designed for doing patching of binaries and a little bit of light reversing, but we're improving that over time. So I'm actually going to load the DLL that contains all the game logic in the game. So here you can see it's showing us the entry point. But what I really want to know is, like, I want to actually see how the player logic works. So you can search the function list over here. I'm just going to start typing player, and if, let's just say I want to start with, I want to fly. Like, how can I fly? So in game hacking, you're going to want to try to violate the server's assumptions about things and do things that it doesn't expect. A lot of games will have, you know, inventories, probably server side, and in this case it was, but a lot of times client movement is at least a little bit trusted on client because you want to compensate for lag.
And you don't want to have a massive amount of network traffic as much too.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go to, I'm going to search for jump, and well, there's this function called player can jump. That sounds kind of interesting. If you look at the code, it looks like it's calling some vtable function. So
I should clarify too, I mentioned Unity and .NET. Remember that, so there was the version you saw in the video up front, just before this was last year's. This one is the Pony Island is the sort of second revision of it, and it was done in Unreal Engine 4, which is why we're not looking at .NET, but rather C++.
So can jump sounds like something I want to always be true if I want to fly, right? So I'm actually going to do that right here. I actually got this thing called compile C source. I don't really feel like writing assembly today. It's too early for that. So I just want to write a function that just says return true. And I'm going to hit the compile button, and it just replaced that function with return true. So now I should be able to fly, but also it's too slow.
Yeah, make it faster.
So I need to make it faster. Player walk says get walking speed. That sounds good. That's a pretty simple function. So in CTF, one of the things you try to do is just try to come up with the simplest solution. Don't necessarily want the one that's actually correct. You just want something that works.
Quick and dirty. So
that's a floating point load instruction. What happens if I just replace that with an integer load? Floating point, if represented as an integer, is quite large, right? That should give me a lot of speed. So I'm just going to click on this instruction.
We had no idea. When we first did this, we have no idea what this is going to do.
And I'm just going to go edit this instruction and then add an I, and now it's an integer load instruction. So now I'm going to save this binary and just save right over the top of it. So that's the patched binary. And I'm going to go run the game again.
Any other questions so far? Everybody awake? Good. Is the tool open? There is a version of the tool that is not quite the same. This one is like the currently being developed one. But there is a version of it that is actually has slides at the end of the deck, and you can download. It's posted to our GitHub along with slides.
So now if I tap jump, I can fly, which is exactly what I expected, and that is quite nice. And now my run speed is also quite fast. So this is exactly what you want to do if you want to cheat at a game. Like, you're going to want to go.
We had a lot of fun the previous year because we actually had a deathmatch arena in it, and playing like an actual FPS, an actual like capture the flag style, capture the flag and capture. Anyways, but playing the FPS with some other people was just hilarious because everybody had different hacks. One guy had a nice teleport hack. Nobody had an aimbot that we knew of, although I think some people were working on one.
Someone did have an invisibility hack though.
That one was nice. Yeah, there was just a bunch of different like hilarious. So actually, the two of us like had our butt handed to us one night, like at 2 a.m. at ShmooCon playing, and like we're like, he's like, I wrote the game, and I'm like, I was the first person to like implement all the hacks like, for the testing of it, and we just got destroyed by somebody else who had way better like patches to the client last year. And
so this is one of the challenges in here. It's called Blocky's Revenge. You saw Blocky earlier. So this is basically just, this is actually introducing you, because this is a completely custom. It's not Minecraft. So it just teaches you how the gates work.
but very similar mechanics to Redstone, right? So that was
Yeah.
not gate originally. You have a light on off.
So one of the interesting things about these Minecraft challenges, or Minecraft style challenges, is that people tend to use SMT solvers on them. Because I don't want to go try to figure out that formula, so I'm just gonna go tell Z3 to figure it out. So you get a lot of interesting scripts out of that. Unfortunately, when they got to the real room, they got fixed.
The best part was just that, this Minecraft like level map editors or whatever, so you can extract out the data if you really wanted to try to convert it automatically into the circuit. This not so much. So we were really curious to see like how people would solve it. Were they gonna, manually transcribe it? Were they gonna intercept network traffic? Rusty's actually intended. He was hoping somebody would have a network interception, because it turned out like the state of the traces was all in the network traffic, because the server would maintain it. And so if you actually got the example of the network protocol, you could reverse out the logic and the structure of the circuit purely from that.
What actually happened though is they got two guys, each did half.
You spent about 4 hours walking around the map.
They made a Google spreadsheet to contain all the formulas, and once they figured they got it all put in the Google spreadsheet, they wrote a Z3 solver and got the answer that way.
It was one of the teams who did it. They opened up they're like, oh, here has to be solved, and they linked to the Google sheet, and we're like, that's really clever. You could just toggle all the switches and see everything light up like in the spreadsheet itself.
These are the times when I really like having a speed hack.
It's quite convenient. This was, I do want to point out, because Mr. Rusty's proud of it, like, some of the assets, a lot of people are like, how do you, like, and this is basically just him that built most of this. It's a little ridiculous and a lot of time. But a lot of the assets, the trees and the bears and things like that, you can buy or get for free, relatively cheap in kind of various asset stores these days. It's pretty impressive. Which is why actually the bears are suspiciously similar to the bears in Rust, if you've ever played that game, because they use the same assets in the asset store.
So this was a fun one. This is a Unbearable Revenge. There was an Unbearable challenge, which was just a bunch of bears come at you. Well, this was the Revenge, so we had a second version of it. So basically the concept behind this is you have a big chest here, you obviously want to open it, and oh, a bear already got me.
There was loot drops too, kind of like if you're used to playing standard games. Actually, I didn't even realize it, but I guess the drops themselves are even.
We actually had ragdolls this year.
That's actually like relevant to how somebody solved the challenge. We'll get to that one later. It was pretty
So they all come at you. You obviously want to stay away from them. Most people, this was always fun. Like, I can fly. Bears can't climb trees, right? So yeah, this is, you saw this a lot. Every time I visited this place, there was always someone in the tree. But of course, it's not a good CTF challenge unless you have a little fun with it, so.
And that was too easy. Like that hack, like just being able to like, return true on one function. Come on, like we required a little bit higher difficulty.
So yeah, I'm not gonna wait for it here because we're limited on time, but at about 1:30 on this countdown, they all take AK-47s out and shoot you.
And they don't miss. They're very accurate.
So yeah, this game runs pure server-side hit detection, so they have aimbots on the server. Yeah, they're not gonna miss. So we support the right to arm bears. So.
And also awful puns. Like the entire game is full of terrible, terrible puns. So yeah, so if you do you want to spoil the actual solution for that, or we're gonna let people figure out for themselves? Let's spoil it, whatever. We're gonna spoil this one because yeah, you guys are gonna play. Clearly, you're slackers. Nobody hopped on our demo. So the intended solution on that was to actually go below the ground. because the bears can't shoot you if you're below the ground. But you have to stay within the circle, right? The circle of stones is what keeps that chest activated and the countdown going. And so there were a couple of kind of different ways you could do, like a network proxy that you could trigger that pops you below the ground and just kind of hovers you in space and reports you like here's where I'm at. One person had a like permanent like subtract 10 feet from his location. So where his client thought he was versus where the server thought he was were 10 feet off. And so he's walking around on the surface of the thing and he can like activate a chest. And his client's like, yeah, I can get to the chest. It activates it. The server's like, oh sure, you probably could activate it. That seems reasonable. And he's 10 feet below ground as far as the server knows. So the bears could never actually shoot him.
Or you can use skill.
Or you could actually use skill. That's, yeah, we have that on a slide that are on one team. And we were kind of okay with this. Like we sort of knew like, there's going to be multiple solutions to some of this stuff. That happens in CTF. But like maybe it's possible somebody's really good and they just flat out own the bears. And this one team did. Like they had 7 dudes, like 7 samurai, that all got golden guns. Because of course, there's a golden gun in the game, and it's like one of the most powerful weapons. And they just like staked the place out. They had one guy hunkered down in the middle by the chest, and everyone else, and they just kept the bears away. And but they would die because the bears are awesome and they'll miss. But they would get back fast enough to just continually mow down all the bears. I wish we had like a replay where we recorded that one. That's an awesome.
Yeah, I meant to actually have a record replay system, but in the interest of time, it just ran out because creating an MMO is a lot of work.
Turns out. Turns out.
We also hit a bunch of golden eggs everywhere, so you could pick up a.
Have to have an egg finder in the.
Yeah, you have to have an egg finder in your for your rock chain, right? There was this pirate. We're in the pirate bay right now, and there's a pirate ship and a chest on it. So what do you expect is going to be there? It's of course a DLC code, and it's called the Pirate Bay. You probably know what you probably need to do here.
I don't think we're gonna pull that one up. And do we actually pull that function up? Or
No,
we'll just stick with that one. So that was that particular challenge was again just a crack me, right? So a classic like keygen style crack me. That one turned out to be a little easier to solve than we intended. It's really hard to gauge the difficulty of challenges correctly. You sort of estimate, you do your best, but things that you didn't think of, somebody else will think of. Things that you thought were hard, everybody else thinks it's easier, vice versa. The bears were one of the harder challenges. Blocky's Revenge, the one with the circuit, just for the pier. That was kind of spiteful, honestly. Like, it was just so much tedious work. We were really hoping somebody would come up with an automated solution, but it turned out pretty much everybody that solved it that we know of just walked the map and logged everything out of it. But the bears turned out to be a little bit trickier.
So this one was actually crafted up for a real world bug.
You're getting killed, by the way, and dead.
Yeah.
The downside to having, like, one of the things that didn't get finished was audio on when you get hit. And so unless you notice your health bar going down, enemies would sneak up behind you and just be like attacking you. You'd have no idea of that.
This one was actually crafted after a real world bug that has happened in real games in the past. So there's this giant boss. He's got a lot of health. He's tossing fireballs at you the entire time.
Switch over to I love the other view when you see how like big he actually is. Like massive, like
pretty large. If any of you have actually done Unreal 4 development, you might recognize where the model came from.
That was like a free sample that they released.
Yeah.
Right? Or...
Anyway, basically it's actually an integer overflow bug. And it has actually happened in real games before where the boss has...
Darn spiders.
The boss has a healing spell. If you get him down to half, he tries to heal himself.
Yeah, ice you could actually did that.
Yeah, I do.
So this was called Fire and Ice was a challenge. There was like a spider queen in the other half, and you could just kind of kill her just by shooting her, and she dropped an ice spell. And of course, the fire, demon, whatever, is only damaged by ice. But if you use fire, you actually heal him up a little bit, right? So like feeding him more fire actually increases his health slightly. If you try to just spam heals at the beginning to try to trigger an overflow.
I got caught by spider.
The spiders did it. But if you get him below half health, you get him below 50%, he triggers like this animation, does like this summoning move, and this fireball envelops him, and he's healed. Like it heals up half his health. So there's like that sort of like race condition where right in between, you get him just below half health, you trigger the animation, but before the healing actually occurs, you spam him with a bunch of fireballs, you heal him up a little bit, and then his heal brings him over max health, And then the check for when you actually, the check for when you originally fireball him only checks whether your fireball at that moment will put him over the limit if it's not already. If it's already over, it just kind of keeps going past. And so like it's intentionally bugged comparison there. And then you just kind of keep spamming the fireballs until you roll him over and he dies. My favorite part about that one was it was a real challenge that you had to exploit. You could completely exploit in-game, right? There's no patching, you didn't have to use any reverse engineering tools. But to even discover what to do, you most likely were going to have to either monitor the network traffic and get actual logs of what his health was to realize when you were and weren't going over, to realize it was possible, or straight up reverse his code. The code that was running on the server was mostly also in the client, so you could actually, it was intentional, you could see the state of things, so you could intentionally reverse out, see the behavior, and act accordingly.
So this was another challenge. There's this NPC over here, he's a farmer. The cows are here just because I've already completed the quest on this character, but he lost his cows and you're supposed to find them. But anyway, this one was an interesting one in that people had all kinds of hilarious unintended solutions for this one. So a lot of people in the course of their flying hack discovered that if you just went high enough, the fog that limits your view distance would go away and you could actually see further than you were supposed to. And you saw this island in the distance.
There's like an island in the middle of nowhere. So actually that's how I saw this challenge originally, because I was taking I was like doing marketing for the game, I was taking like a screenshot of the whole island. Oh, the whole island, by the way, is a giant My Little Pony. So that's where the Pony Island names, it is actually a giant, you're in like the Tail Mountains right now, I think.
Yeah.
And if you actually go up high enough and look down, you just see this My Little Pony shaped outline. And so I was taking the screenshot for that, and I was like, oh wait, there's an island over there. And of course I already have my speed hack on, so I just ran like across the water, because you can actually walk on water in this game. We didn't add swimming.
Didn't have time.
Yeah, swimming is one of the other feature lists that didn't make it. You just run across the ocean until you get to the island. It's a giant kind of open world, which was actually one of the things that was really interesting. In fact, this was actually, Rusty was like, of all the people that have ever used Unreal 4, this is the very first like open world MMO on Unreal 4 at the time for a weekend CTF, which is pretty hilarious to me.
So there was a Cow King here guarding this chest, and you had to go kill him, but the challenge was to actually get to the island. You had to find it. You were supposed to use, the intended solution was actually to go do some binary modification or network traffic modification on, there's a fast travel system. I can just actually go to the fast travel system. Pony Express, of course. And it gives you a list of locations. So you could actually hack the game to just change the name of one of those to the cow level. We actually called it the cow level because we had to reference Diablo 2.
I think we actually have time for that. If you want to pull that up in Binary Ninja. Yeah, so anybody know like the cow level story in Diablo? There was like these rumors in Diablo, like, oh, there's a hidden cow level, and people would troll other people with it. And like there was no cow level in the original Diablo, but they actually put a cow level into Diablo 2 just to screw with people. And so we likewise had a cow level. The original Cow King that you killed there, you got an item that you could steal his abilities with. Then you got like a lightning spell. And there's a bunch of other random drops as well, like a lot of the items and guns that you just had to sort of farm. You had to kill a bunch of the guys and you get them random drops. Very few of them were actually required to solve anything.
So yeah, if you go in the code, get fast travel destinations, you see this string, it points to town, and right next to it is cow bungalow and cow level. Well, if you modify that to cow level, it then makes you, it allows you to get to, like, it basically replaces, instead of going to the town, it now goes to the cow level instead.
So you can use
that was
any
the
fast travel
intended hack there.
And there were some hints to that, like when you talk to the NPCs that gives you that quest, he kind of talks about, there was lightning, like there was like a teleport, or there was, this also the lightning king on the cows was his attack. And like you can't find them, like they're nowhere on the map, there's nowhere around that I can see where my cows go. So that's sort of the intended hint. But the funny way that people solved that was, it turns out if you screwed with your walking speed, you choose your movement, mess with your movement speed. And because of the ragdoll physics, you saw when he like bumped into his own body before, like dead bodies would just flop around for a little while, which my kids thought was the most hilarious thing ever. They would just be like walk into your body. But when you die, like you were like a movable object, And if you were fighting a bear, you happened to be like having speed hacks, and you happened to, it was a set of conditions where you would just get flung like miles across the map. I mean, quite literally, like you would see people like fighting the bears, and all of a sudden the body would just shoot. But you're still like, you're still that character when you die unless you restart the game again. So you would just like fly all across the map. And so there was at least one person who was an IRC was like, yeah, I found the cows because a bear knocked me there. They just got, like the odds of that happening, I have no idea. Like, cause it's like this massive map and there's one island in the corner. And we're like, all right, well, good for you. You got a nice, like at least you did have to have a patch client before you could trigger that. But. So yeah, there's the list of all the different challenges. We showed you the bearable. One was the teleport hack. You had to actually either modify the network traffic or add in functionality to the client to change your location kind of on the fly. Fire and Ice was the underground overflow bug. Overachiever, there was an achievement system in it because what game these days doesn't have an achievement system? And you just had to collect a bunch of other different random things. The hardest, I think even like the egg hunt was one of the ones that you had to do as an achievement. But you had to like kill a certain number of people.
One of the achievements is, of course, we support the right to arm bears.
Yeah, you had to make it to the bear. You had to get the bears like, to the AK-47 stage. So even if you didn't solve the bear challenge, but you got up in the tree far enough to realize that they were about to destroy you, then you got that achievement. Cows Coming Home, Pirates Revenge, Crack Me, Blockies. Yeah, anyways. All right. So what did other people do? Like, what were the actual third-party hacks? You want to do this? Yeah,
So one of them was the LD preload. I'm sure a lot of you have done LD preload on Linux, where you actually inject a DLL into the process space of a new process, and you can. Linux is quite nice in that if there's duplicate symbols, it will just go with the first one that was loaded, and if you preload one, then that's obviously the first one that's loaded. So you can actually hook functions this way. And basically, for example, you could hook the player can jump function and write it in C, just compile a shared object file, and then LD preload it.
Binary reverse engineering tools that allow you to write C and overwrite and directly just do it that way.
And basically, at that point, you have your jump hack, whatever you need. I think the person that did this also did a send hook as well.
Yeah, in fact, actually, he ended up rewriting most of his. He was annoyed at writing the C, so he actually wrote a Python wrapper for a C stub, and he just hooked all the networks that it received. And so most of his hacks he did essentially via network hacks, but instead of writing a real network proxy the way he should have, he was like, I'm just going to shove it in here, use Python so I can easily change it. It was a little convoluted.
His handle is very lazy guy, so.
He is a very lazy guy. Yeah, there were other people that solved it that way as well. All right. That was at B. Hit B again. There you go. Yeah. So somebody released a Wireshark dissector. Again, much of the intended solutions involved analyzing the network traffic and figuring out the protocol. This guy didn't, I think, solve any of the challenges during the game, but after like the week after he released this, and he did a really nice job of just purely analyzing the network traffic behavior. So you sort of you fiddle with it. You move slightly, you shoot slightly, you see what happens in the network traffic, and figure out kind of blind protocol analysis from there. Which was intended. We wanted people to come up with these alternate solutions. We like the fact that it's not just pop open IDA and solve it that way, but you could also do kind of legitimate research purely on the network level. This was the best one. This was really impressive, and I don't know how much of this these guys had done during the event, or how much they did afterward. But they actually had a DirectX overlay. So that blue box you can see there is not actually the game. They actually like overlaid on top of the screen and had like this little like in-game sheet, so they could modify things. They could turn on and off selective hacks. They could patch functions, so they could do their teleport hack. And so they implemented most of their stuff that way. So if you actually want to go test this at home and play with the server, and you don't really feel like you're implementing this yourself, this is probably the hack that I would use because it's pretty clean and nice. Samurai, one of the teams that played, had their little, they just dropped a GIST sample. Theirs was clever because they hooked the chat functionality. So actually it's somewhat similar to the Firefox presentation yesterday. We're using the classic override a math function, and then you can trigger the debugger from the console. Do the same thing here, right? Like hook the chat function, add an extra functionality so that you can trigger in game your patches to enable, disable, to add teleport, things like that. So there was an admin client that if you were logged into an administrator group, you could just teleport to locations by using a teleport command. And so other people sort of re-implemented that behavior in their client just by hooking chat and letting them send extra commands. unintended bugs, because those bees were clearly not intended to be on that bicycle. All right, next. Yeah, actually, I can be careful with this. Yeah, oh, how many theft? Yeah.
This was an interesting one. So during the course of administering the game, we ran into some issues where people were reporting like disappearing items. That sounds like a bug. So I go into the game and yeah, the items are actually disappearing.
You're afraid like the drop rate was wrong, like, oh no, did something get screwed up and the monsters are not dropping?
Now I gotta go like look at the code and figure out, okay, what's causing these items to disappear? And then I found the vulnerability. So what ended up actually happening was there was actually two interesting ways of doing this, and I think people were doing both. So one of them, the one I actually found in the code was there was a use item command, and basically what happened, the way items were picked up is when the client detected that it collided with a dropped item, it would send a use command to the server saying, I want to pick this up. And it would just do it automatically.
And the server had no checking whatsoever on where you actually were.
Yeah, it didn't, I kind of forgot to add the check to say, are you close to it?
This could happen.
It was also a side effect of my decision to make items global just for fun, because it was funny. Because people can steal items, like, oh, I shot that bear over there and he dropped an item. Someone could totally go and
Steal
collect
other
it.
people's stuff, yeah.
That was intended, but not the person who wrote a little bot that sat on the network. And anytime it saw the spawn item command, it would send the use item command for that item.
So he just picked up, he was the ultimate thief. He just sat there and collected everyone's drops. So like if you were in the same like, like near him at all, in the same region of the game, like you just saw no drops. It was pretty awesome.
And I heard rumors of someone sending a certain position, which I assume was something like a NAN or something like that caused the collision detector to screw up and just be colliding with all the items.
So they actually, they got their client to think that they were everywhere, essentially. And then their own client's like, yo, yeah, I'm picking up that item because I'm everywhere, right? Like the omniscience player. And I'm the present. So we talked about this one already, the team of the golden guns that just took out the bears via sheer brute FPS skills, which I'm quite impressed with. Flying bodies, of course, the bears to knock people across the map to find the island that they were supposed to teleport to, or at least run across the water. And the egg finding, you.
So this was a very clever solution, finding all those eggs. So Unreal 4 is interesting in that if it can't find a model, it will happily continue loading the game, just not render that model. So what they did was let's just go delete all the models.
So literally, like the file system, they went deleted assets. They just started deleting like models and files in the file system, like trees and houses and everything's just gone.
So basically, all you could see at that point was eggs. So they just went around and collected them all.
That was we had no idea what that one. They were like, really, you can do that? And we're like, sure enough, like you can actually just delete things. And they're just like, yeah, no problem, we'll figure it out. Cheat engine, this one, it turned out to not actually be useful, but we thought it was interesting that somebody tried it. Kind of in the traditional video game hacking world, one of the more common things to do is you want to give yourself more items or change memories and locations, change memory locations. And so the cheat engine is a popular tool where you basically scan memory and say, I have 58 bullets right now, or I have X number of this, or I currently have this much health. And then you do something, you change that number, and then you say, okay, now I've got this of that number. So they actually will just diff the memory and try to find out something that was that value, went to this value, and if there's a lot of similar values, you can iterate it down further. It's really easy and quick for doing that. Again, built for game hacking. And you could do that, and you could totally change the amount of inventory your client thought it had, but that was really server side, so it turned out that didn't actually help anybody, I think, solve any of the quests that we had this year. We probably should have put something that would kind of be that style of hack, because it is a nice kind of approach, a different way of solving the problems, and it's sort of like easy mode for reverse engineering, right? So it was kind of interesting to sort of maybe step back and be like, what are the other problems that we can actually sort of apply that approach to that we're not thinking about reverse engineering work, because I'm super lazy about reversing as well. Spelunking, the cable, yeah. So the original, I mentioned earlier, playtesting this stuff is hard, and making sure that you actually eliminate false paths and things you don't want people to do is a really important part of testing the game. Although sometimes you get hilarious.
That's true even of real world applications, like the defender's job is way harder because you don't know what the attacker is going to do.
Right. So in this case, the other people on the team were playing the game earlier, and one of the guys pointed out, like, oh look, there's a hole in the map. If you fall below the world, I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, go in the fire cave, go in this corner, and you can just fall below the map. I'm like, oh, that's clever. I'm like, wait, can I get to the chest from here? And so I just fell below the map. I like ran all the way back over to the chest, jumped up from below it, activated the chest, and sat there. And so like Rusty was like, that's too easy. So he actually added like a death field at the bottom, so that teleport hack where you had to get below the bears, and also fix the hole in it. But you couldn't just like hop below the map and stay below the map to trigger it. So that was again something that we were trying to like align the difficulty and the expected solutions a little bit. So some stuff we eliminated, some stuff we're like, no, that's a hilarious solution, leave it, we're okay if somebody finds it. All right, so useful CTF tools in general. There's a lot of other CTF tools that have come out of sort of the CTF scene. XOR tool, Pwn tools are a nice library for exploitation. Kira is a tool that GeoHot made. If you haven't checked out Kira, do so. GeoHot's not the best developer per se, but he's a really good hacker, and so he built a tool that has some really interesting approaches. It's a dynamic analysis system, and you can hook into QEMU, and it actually like integrates strace output along with live runs. You can visualize memories. You can actually watch memory layouts change. Like it has some sort of interesting things, I think. You know, in terms of standard reverse engineering tools, we all use IDA. But there's sort of a gap, I think, in terms of interesting ideas that people are doing, and so that's a fun one to check out if you haven't already. Other bunch of miscellaneous CTF resources, and we're actually under time. Look at that, 4 minutes. I think, oh yeah, we have other stuff. There's all the rights and licenses for the pictures. There's the slides. Here's some random GIFs just to show off that we can do random GIFs. All right. Slides and Binary Ninja, the tool you go to binary.ninja to download as well, and source for the Python version. Any other questions? Yes?
Did anyone find any server-side vulnerabilities?
Not that we know of. So yeah, no, we haven't heard anybody who found a server-side vulnerability, which, yeah, that's two years in a row. We did well in that. Like CTFs constantly get popped, their infrastructure gets blown. Actually, the PHP bug that I showed, was originally exploited in CSOL CTF. Like their actual scoreboard infrastructure had something like that. And so people were like solving every challenge by sending an array for their answer. They're like, oh crap, let's go fix their infrastructure. So yeah, it turns out when you make a hacking challenge, people are gonna hack the hacking infrastructure too. So, but no, we've so far had a pretty good run. Haven't had any server-side bugs that we know of. I mean, if somebody wants to hack the server and get the database of like CTF players made up usernames, then they knock themselves out, but there's nothing else on the box.
Well, I hate to do this, but in fact, it is coffee time. And so thank you very much. It was awesome.